Ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon. Can you hear me? Not yet. Do we have sound? So, very good afternoon. We're going to crank it up a bit so that everyone can hear this conference, this first conference, VAPEXPO Paris 2014. We are going to talk this afternoon about a very important and interesting subject, which is health. With two people around the table, I'm going to present you in a few moments. So, VAP and health is the theme of this subject, the review of the state of health and security. So first a small jingle.
Voilà, bienvenue à tous cet après-midi.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, for this conference on health. I'm pleased to see Mr. Ricardo Polosa from the University of Catania in Italy. He's a specialist in the fight against tobacco, and
Mr. Nicolas Bonnet,
Director of RESPADD. We are very pleased to see him here. He's the Director of the Network of Health Institutes for the Prevention of Addictions, pharmacists, specialized in public health. This afternoon, we are going to organize this conference in three parts. First of all, presentations, PowerPoint presentations, where Mr. Polosa and Mr. Bonnet are going to talk about their perception on the reality of the e-cigarette when it comes to health, what is known, the review of the states, the community, the ex-smokers, etc. And in the second part, we are going to have a debate with questions. We're going to talk about social media as well. And thirdly, we will give you some time to ask some questions, and we will have a possibility to answer some questions on risks involved, and also public health, of course, and how the government sees electronic cigarettes. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to Nicolas Bonnet from RESPADD, and he has prepared a presentation on the subject and on the state of the matters for the electronic cigarettes. Very good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here today. So indeed, I would like to give you some slides on the electronic cigarettes and what the scientific studies around this subject about smoking addiction and how it is perceived by the big public and the companies as well. So first of all, the electronic cigarette has become popular recently. In 2006-2007, the first electronic cigarette was developed, and it was a product that was created for the consumers, with the consumers, and it has been adapted since the origin of the electronic cigarette, and we arrived, of course, to a certain result. And in 2006, the first electronic cigarette was made, and 2007 to 12, we had some adjustments, an enormous development within the electronic cigarette. New products were launched onto the market, very performing. There's an improving results on the products. And, of course, a lot of shops where you can buy these electronic cigarettes. There are more than 1,700 in 2014, so it is an enormous expansion of the number of boutiques, shops, and some companies who produce tobacco are starting to buy electronic cigarette companies. So you know that the electronic cigarette, you know that how it works. It composes of different parts. These are the most important ones. So the wicks, the e-liquid. You can inhale the fumes. There's an electronic part as well with the battery, a diode, so that the liquid can get a certain temperature and evaporate. There are very sophisticated materials on the market. Also, aesthetics plays a very important role. You know, there's a lot of models on the market. So you also know that the manufacturers have a lot of ideas when it comes to aesthetics. Then we have the e-liquids, which are composed of propylene glycol, vegetable glycerine, water, aromas, alcohol, and nicotine. So the first two are the most important ones, and the other products are in smaller quantities present in this liquid. And then, of course, we have nicotine. Is between 8 and 12 milligrams. So these, the maximum dose in France is 20 milligrams per milliliter. So there's a lot of aromas available on the market. Some are similar to tobacco taste, others have other tastes. So in total, there's more than 77,000 products on the market. And we will talk about this subject later on as well. And the good news for France for this year is that AFNOR is going to propose to have a certain packet of norms, to have a framework, a regulatory framework, and also for the security, to improve security levels. The flask needs to be normalized, standardized. So these products need to correspond to certain norms. And these, USP is the American Institute. It's a very important institute in the United States. And this organization is going to make sure that all the norms are being respected. And we hope to see some results by the end of the year. Of course, about the vapes, we have the different parts of the electronic cigarette as we saw them before. So first of all, there's the coil. There's going to be a battery with a diode, a light, a LED light that is going to indicate, okay, this cigarette is working. And then afterwards, the liquid is going to be heated. This is going to be transformed in vapor, and the filaments are going to suck up this liquid, and the user is going to be able to vaporize, really. So, this is another form of seeing it. First, so here you see how the consumer, what phases the consumer goes through, and there's an electronic current that's going through the liquid, which is going to cause these vapors, and the consumer is going to inhale the gas and the liquid particles. With propylene glycol, for example, this is one of the components of the liquid that is vaporized. And then afterwards, for the e-cigarette, we have the same chemical composition, but for tobacco products, it's totally different. And the second-hand smoke is also totally different, the composition of this. And then, of course, the nicotine. Is it sufficient for the user, for the consumer? Will the user get enough nicotine? And, well, the peak of the nicotine, you can see it here in this graph. So every cigarette will provoke a peak, and this will, of course, cause some sort of addiction. And this is different for the e-cigarette, because during the whole day, you can have a e-cigarette without having these peaks, for example, which is the case for tobacco. And the results will totally be different for tobacco as for e-cigarettes. And then we see at the cotinine levels, which is one of the metabolic components of the liquid. So the cotinine level is going to be more or less the same for tobacco smoking as for vaping. So the number or the quantity of this cotinine is to be compared with a regular cigarette. And then we are going to talk about something else, the toxical product. That is one matter which is not completely clear yet within the scientific world, but we still are receiving more and more data about this. We have a class of products, cancerogenic products, that we can find in tobacco, of course. If you compare the electronic cigarette with the regular cigarette, or any other devices like patches, for example, then we can see that the electronic cigarette has 1,500 times less nitrosamine as the electronic cigarette, and a little bit more than the patches or the gums, but a lot less than the electronic cigarette. So we have a product that does not deliver as many toxins as the regular tobacco. And then the other cancerogenic products in cigarettes, e-cigarettes, if you compare them to the regular cigarettes, then you see that they are not comparable, absolutely not. So one cigarette, if you compare the ratio, so one packet, for example, of 20 cigarettes, then you have a huge number of toxins involved, and the threshold is a lot lower with e-cigarettes. So then you have the classical tobacco with cancerogenic products because of the combustion of tobacco, for example, which can cause chokes, for example. And also these fine particles are very present in the regular cigarettes, which gives irritations, and not only in the mouth, but also in the throat and in the respiratory apparatus. And in the electronic cigarette, for example, the thresholds are a lot lower. They are not cancerogenic. There's no fine particles. Is there a nicotine? Yes. Are there irritating substances? Yes, that's true. But these are a lot lower than with a regular cigarette. About the electronic cigarette, is it without danger smoking it? And who do you have to trust? Today, a lot of studies have been conducted, very recent studies with different results, and these have been financed not by the tobacco industry, and there's a lot of contradictions between these studies as well. There's a number of details that contradict each other, very alarming sometimes, but also very in favor of the electronic cigarette sometimes. So, of course, you have to take precautions. You have to look at the center. You have to keep aside both of the positive and the negative things, and you have to look straight into the studies. And then the experts, they have some difficulties because they have details that contradict each other, and it's difficult to do recommendations, for example. And the tabacologists, for example, are more in favor of electronic cigarettes, and they also give their ideas on the electronic cigarettes. And then maybe one last thing. One thing you have to take into account, and that's something we saw in the different tables as well with the toxins, is that with the electronic cigarette, we're on the highway in the good direction, so 130 kilometers an hour. So we have to adjust a little bit. We're not in a completely right framework as yet. But with the regular cigarette, we're driving in the opposite direction, and it's really dangerous. So two completely different positions. And of course, we have to improve the knowledge on these electronic cigarettes, on the health issues, and etc. But we're already going in a good direction. So the thresholds, for example, are already known for a great part. And we know that it is far better than the regular cigarette. And then second-hand smoke, very passive smoking, very important, causes a lot of polemics. And the second-hand smoke, does it exist for e-cigarettes? Well, for the irritating substances and nicotine, it is true, it exists. For the cancerogenic substances, we're not sure yet. We're waiting for more details. And for carbon monoxide, no, not at all. And then you have to take another point into account, which is the time it takes to evaporate. And if you smoke a regular cigarette, you have fumes which are a lot more toxic than with e-cigarettes. So what is very important is to look at the number of times you inhale and exhale. With the electronic cigarettes, you have about 300 inhalations for each 3 seconds. And with 20 cigarettes, 7.5 minutes for 15 inhalations. So the time is different, 15 inhalations, and you will have about 150 minutes of exhalation, and so a lot more exposition for the people, exposition to these smokes. And then the half-life of the particles in the environment will disappear a lot faster with vaping devices, whereas for the cigarette, it's about 20 minutes. So very short period in the half-time, so only a couple of seconds later after exhalating, there's no more gas in the atmosphere. So what are the effects on the health? We have discussed this a lot. There's not a lot of toxins, so not a lot of complications, but we have to say that there's a lot less people coping with bronchitis or the respiratory apparatus.
On a une nette amélioration de la capacité respiratoire par rapport à la cigarette.
Compared to a regular cigarette, this product is a lot better. There's no tar, there's no cancerogenic or almost no cancerogenic particles. So smaller risks. The electronic cigarette is indeed a very tool that reduces the risks, even though it contains nicotine. And what are the effects on long term? Well, we're not going to discuss this because there's a lot of studies we have to wait for. But we can say that we will not see the same catastrophe as with the tobacco so many years ago. What is the evolution of the addictions? For example, if you smoke, you have a physical need to smoke, and it's also a way of acting. You need a cigarette in your hand. It's a way of compensating something. If you have a certain state of mind, you are looking for pleasure, and it's a way of distracting yourself. And then with this cigarette, e-cigarette, you have, if you remind, you have different peaks of nicotine levels, not as steep as with the regular cigarettes, smaller waves, if we can express it in this way. So this is going to have another effect on the brain. So is the vapor going to be addicted, stay addicted to the electronic cigarette? Of course, he can stop vaping. He can pass on to liquids without nicotine, for example, and he can do a mix of both. Does it help people to stop smoking? Well, nicotine in tobacco products, not at all. It's very hard to stop smoking when you use tobacco products. With the e-cigarette, it's not as clear. We see that people are less tendent to smoke. If I look at the results of an inquiry that was done on a forum, we can see that the electronic cigarettes, on about 10,000 people who responded, that about 74% went from the regular tobacco to the electronic cigarette and stopped smoking. So it's a complete change of habits, really. And what can we recommend to the smokers and non-smokers then? For the smokers, we say yes to the electronic cigarette. Why? Well, because there's the risk to be dependent and to be addicted to tobacco diminishes. And of course, you have also the prevention element, which is very important. With the non-smokers, well, there we see that it's not as good to start with smoking electronic cigarettes, because it could be possible that you become addicted to it, and also you could fall back to the regular tobacco products and start smoking again.
Est-ce que la cigarette électronique va faire persister du coup la dépendance?
Will the tobacco, the electronic cigarette, cause a persistence in dependency? Well, of course, you have the aesthetic aspect of the electronic cigarette. It's a habit to start smoking electronic cigarettes, so this could be a risk. And what is the future then for the electronic cigarette? It's an enormous $1 million market, really. It's exploding the market. This is the proof of it. We have some numbers from the United States, but the figures in France are the same. So the number of people that bought these products has exploded as well. And we see that there's not really an effect, cause-to-effect thing, and we see indeed that the number of cigarettes is slightly going down in France, and also the youngsters, for example, are smoking less than they used to be. I'm not sure if it has to do with the apparition of the electronic cigarette, but we see indeed that the number of smokers is slightly dropping. And that was at the same time when the electronic cigarette was introduced. So the question is whether those are correlated or not. And then we see that the sales of products to stop smoking has indeed also diminished by 32%.
Okay, of course, there are data, it's numbers, but it's very important to take that into consideration. And when you have a decrease in the sales of tobacco and all those products that are substitute, actually, at the end of the day, you have industries which are trying to, carry out on that and trying to retrieve that share, and also with customers, with clients and users. And the idea is also to be a bit confusing, creating a quite, difficulty. And at the end of the day, we've had recently examples with other products which were carried out for teenagers, but also for women. Obviously, we need to be cautious. We really need to pay attention to all those products, to all the messages that are given. And we need really, I repeat myself, to pay attention to that. So where actually, where are we placed? 50 years ago, it was quite easy. It was a market where you had nicotine, you had different types of tobacco to chew, to smoke. But now it's, easier because you have reduction in the combustion, and you have all the products which are substitutes. And, depending on the prescription that you have a decrease of the risks. So, of course, e-cigarette and all new products linked to, new ideas, for example, the English tobacco and so on and so forth. So it is a great evolution that is carried out. We have a great challenge, really, and the monopoly that we had of the nicotine is not anymore present. So people always try to keep that monopoly on the market, and they have different actions for politics, etc. And what about also different other things for, tobacco here, tobacco products? Here, e-cigarette is less, of course, toxic than tobacco that is heated. And, apart from all the toxins that you will take into consideration, you have less in the e-cigarette anyway. And finally, risk populations, and of course we do not advise the consumption of those products, even though, at a certain moment you need to, go together with people. I'm dealing with pregnant women, for example, but also young people and previous smokers, as well as non-smokers. So for all these, so-called risky population, we have to pay more and more attention and keep up with that behavior. Now, as we saw before, decrease in the consumption, but at the same time we have, e-cigarette that is increasing mainly in Paris area. What do you, what does that mean? Is that a reduction of the overall group? If we take the American data, for example, we can see an increase between 2011 and 12 from people who started smoking and just, to have an experience, new experience, but at the end of the day, we have a decrease of those people who, consume nicotine product. So, what about young people? Do you think they are obliged to, carry out with smoking products? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It is a question people often ask me. I'm not sure because, it depends on the trends, depending also on the experience that young people have. So who decide what? This is my last slide. We have different players, very important players, of course, medicine industry, and here you have all market shares as far as all consumers are concerned, but also people who are addicted. And, before they were only treated with the, sanitary systems and or health systems, but now it is different. Really, we have different points of view, and the authorities, public authorities, do hesitate a lot on what choice to make on the diffusion of products. That could be e-products or also personal vapors. So, of course, e-cigarette is very, very present. We have a lot of players, as I said, and we'll probably have a decrease of actors, of players, with a focusing on the, and of course, more important persons and actors and players. And, also we have all the tobacco shops, for example, who try to keep also to dominate the market. And also here I wrote parents, but parents and society, which doesn't know what to do, and you have contradictions in the society, in education, and people are a bit lost. So then we also have law, rules. What about taxes? What about regulations? What about trading, industry, and so more? To develop that will have, I hope, the opportunity to deal with in the future, having, of course, precise data coming from literature that we do not have here yet. So that's very important. And I hope that great work will really, be taken into consideration by the authorities. So many thanks for your attention, and I'm here to, of course, answer to your questions. And really, it is a tool, the e-cigarette, to reduce risk. So please diffuse that in all the population of smokers. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Bonnet.
Many thanks to you. Before giving the floor to Professor Ricardo Polosa, I have one question, actually, or an observation, remark. You have signed an article in the Washington Post, which, had a great echo on the community of vapers. Could you please make a summary of that article? And second question is to know why, beyond the debates, beyond the effects effects of the e-cigarette on health, why don't we have a consensus of that famous highway, that exceptional metaphor that you were using before, you know, to find an agreement? You are, you know, driving 140 kilometers per hour. So why can we have those terrible attacks as compared, you know, to all the past? Because we are here, there is a great difference between the two products as far as the risks are concerned. Many thanks for that question. The article that was published, in fact, in that newspaper, together with Jean-Pierre Cotron and Philippe Michaud, president of IPSA, the other association, that article was, you know, a consequence of the diffusion of the WHO on the e-cigarette, and that appeared a few weeks ago. And, you know, reading all these recommendations, actually we will pay attention to that after on the World Health Organization, but nevertheless, we wanted to react as soon as possible in order to, you know, to focus the right idea, giving right data, correct data, and not, you know, saying nonsense, and also to stress the different lobbies, and you know, which are very, very present also in the WHO, and that's obvious. And sometimes, you know, they're not favorable of the diffusion of e-cigarette, so that's why we wanted to publish that article, trying to be objective and trying to give data on the diffusion of the as a tool of reduction of, you know, risks and so on and so forth. So it is a tool that enables smokers to handle better their habits. But what about your second question, that metaphor that was very nice on about the highway? It is a very good question, actually, and it's difficult for me to give an answer, actually, because, you know, I mean, not a unique answer. It is a paradox at the end of the day, that metaphor, because you have a product, because you do not know everything, but you know somehow a lot about safety, about the decrease of risks as compared to the cigarettes. And why is it suffering from so many attacks, you know, from all the communities, which could be politics, could be health, could be public authorities, and so on and so forth? It is a real question, you know, a real debate. We have a lot of challenges beyond that, challenges linked to society, to finance, to different topics. So you cannot solve it just right now. And moreover, we need to, you know, as actors, we need to really find the right dimension in the right way. Why not 140 kilometers per hour, but trying to reduce the risks for the consumers? Dr. Polosa, you have the floor.
Bon après-midi, Paris.
Good afternoon, Paris.
I'm glad to be here. And I'm very grateful to Remy Parola and VAPE for this kind invitation that allows me to speak to you, and I hope in very simple terms, about the many complexities of this very exciting area of, let's say, medicine. May I say that? For me? No. Okay, let's say this area of entertainment that may have some medical implications, right? And I really want to make quickly a few disclosures. First of all, I'm a medic. I run one of the most busiest smoking cessation centers in Italy. So sometimes people tend to forget that I'm not a politician, not just a scientist, but a medic, and I know what I'm talking about. Second of all, I would like to thank you, VAPE, also for the kind donation to a non-profit organization, because my honoraria goes entirely to the Italian League Anti-Smoking, who has been battling very hard against the politician trying to hamper the progress of electronic cigarette in Italy and in the world. And with that said, I hope the clever technician here will start making a move, because otherwise you get very bored. There is a bonus. I'm Italian, so my Italian English is very understandable. And also, I'm talking to the people in the box over there. You should pay me money because I'm too easy to translate. Okay, I think you don't mind if I sit down, do you? Can I sit down? All right. I think the reason why you're here trying to listen to me is because you care about yourself. Because you want to know whether this change in lifestyle is an healthy choice or is not an healthy choice or is something in between. Right? So that's the reason why the title of this talk is How Healthy is to Vape Today? Yesterday was less healthier, today is much healthier, tomorrow, question mark. For those who really want to wander about and enjoy the fair, I'll start from the end by saying two very simple and quick messages. This is the WHO report, the statement that Dr. Bonnet rightly criticized through the article in the Washington Post. And it says essentially that electronic cigarettes, I'm reading it, you can read it, I can read it, deliver lower levels of toxin than conventional cigarettes. You know, public experts and public authorities, they say, however, but, they're never happy. There is always a but, there is always a however. But they still deliver some toxins. The accurate statement is, and that's for you guys, that you vape, electronic cigarette so far deliver lower levels of toxin than conventional cigarettes. And by an account, these lower levels of toxins are, in my opinion, of irrelevant health impact. So you should go back home happily today, thinking of what I've just said. Another important statement in that document by the WHO is that electronic cigarettes pollute the air less than conventional cigarettes. We all know that. We all been knowing this thing for years. But they still pollute the air. The correct statement is the exposure of bystanders to chemicals in e-cigarette vapor is not at levels that would be expected to cause any health problems besides some irritation, if you really want to account for that. So these infograms was prepared by myself and the head of CASA, Ellen Keller, in 2011. And let me tell you, today, September 2014, I'm even more convinced that I was showing in 2011 was true. It's a simple fact. I'm not going to repeat what Dr. Bonnet just said, because no tobacco, no combustion. Just vaporization of nicotine-containing solvents plus some ingredients, actually some ingredients. Now, you see, there are over 80,000 different ingredients. Nicotine fats. So we are taking nicotine. But nicotine, is that really dangerous? Besides the scaremongering and alarmistic big titles in newspapers, especially in Spain, but also in Italy, and I'm not sure about France. I lost track of news media in France. Also, okay, nicotine is not a poison. Nicotine is a neurostimulant. And many people just use it because they can function intellectually, cognitively, without nicotine. I've been knowing many painters, many writers, many journalists, and they just said, I cannot go on without my fix. Okay? So depriving them of the fix will cause some discomfort. And having electronic cigarette on the market, on the stage, will relieve that discomfort. But let's forget about this. Let's focus on the health issue. Nicotine is not a carcinogenic substance. It's not causing lung disease. It's not has some effect on cardiovascular system, but it's not surely causing heart attacks or these kind of things. And just to draw a line, even an electronic cigarette basically is not nicotine that may cause the problem. If there's something that really needs to be investigated, it's not nicotine, it's something else. So that explains why when we met in London a year ago, and when deciding the level of risk of nicotine-containing products based, on several items, morbidity, mortality, contraband, black market, impact on your pockets, and a number of items have been piled up to classify the risk. Well, the risk of e-cigarette equates to 4, when the risk to tobacco cigarettes equates to 100. The problem is, how low risk is low risk for electronic cigarettes? That's the debate that goes around with most of public health experts. And I try here today to summarize with very few slides what I believe it is that the low risk level for electronic cigarettes is so low that it should be taken into account. Of course, Dr. Bonnet has just mentioned carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is generated by combustion. So basically, and you see from this slide, the circle dot is people who quit smoking. So there are levels of carbon monoxide starting from 20 parts per million, goes right down to below 7 parts per million, which is basically normal. If you go outside and you start breathing in the polluted area of Paris, you will have 5 ppm, 6 ppm, 7 ppm of CO, okay? So this is a good story. Vaping does not raise carbon monoxide. Why? News saying nothing about this? Huh? It's a very important toxic. It causes a lot of problem. You can ask me about this later on if we have time for discussion. Okay, we just want to focus on what comes in your body when you vape. It's nicotine, solvents, PGs and VGs, flavorings, and other contaminants. Please, just give me 30 seconds of your attention to try and understand what I'm trying to show here. There's no way by epidemiology we are going to answer all these questions about these implausible risks. They are too little. And it's going to take 30 years for cigarettes, it's going to take 60 years for vaping, okay? But there are models. One of the models that we can envisage to use is cytotoxicity models. So they take your human cells, they put it in a little plastic transparent dish, they give food to these cells, it's called culture media, okay? And they start growing until they cover all the bottom of this transparent dish, and they look like this, nice, healthy. What happens if I smoke a cigarette and I give some of the vapor of the tobacco smoke to these healthy cells? They die. They detach from the bottom of the dish and they die. What happens if I vape with nicotine? They look pretty much healthy to me. Don't you think it's more or less the same? I cannot see any major evidence, although if I can measure some difference, yeah, some implausible difference will be there. But anyway, this is just some data that says exactly what I just said, that nicotine is not associated with any cytotoxicity. These are dose response study, okay? And then, this slide I think has been shown already. When you think of nicotine, you think of total dose in terms of toxicity. When we think of addiction, when we talk about addiction, we need to talk about speed of dosing, which is a completely different matter. Total dose. Believe it or not, the total dose that you can reach with most advanced models today is equal to 1 cigarette, but it takes 35 minutes to reach the same dose in your body. Are you vaping 35 minutes continuously? I don't think so. And nicotine has a metabolism because our body are not stupid. They defend themselves against toxic substances, so they metabolize them. And metabolism of nicotine is fairly rapid. Let's take a walk into the solvents and excipients. Propylene glycol and glycerol. Okay, you can read this in basic facts. We know that these are fairly safe. Fairly safe. They can cause some irritation in susceptible individuals. Not in all individuals will experience irritation from these components, from these excipients. And as a matter of fact, you can switch from PG to VG just to see whether the excipients is less irritant for yourself, so that you can enjoy vaping. And again, in the same model of happy cells living on the bottom flask, you will see that there's no cytotoxicity measured. However, again, scaremongering media, especially in Spain, has projected terrible scenario for these ingredients. Lipoid pneumonia. Wow, that sounds very nasty, doesn't it? Lipoid pneumonia is something that occurs when our lung is exposed to huge amounts of lipids. And these cells are our guardian angels deep inside our lungs. They are called macrophages. What they do, they eat all dirt that comes from the environment that we breathe every day. So in this case, they are eating lipids that are coming from somewhere. But it's not coming from your vape cigarette. It's not coming from vaping, although there are case reports. But these case reports have been clearly misunderstanding the whole, let's call it biology of the electronic cigarette, because the glycerol is not a lipid. It comes from glycerine, that's correct, but glycerol is an alcohol, so it's very soluble, and it doesn't get stuck in macrophages. So it's a lie, or people didn't just understood what they were doing. Actually, that lady was fumigating the house against cockroaches, so fumigation contains lipids, and that's the real reason. This is a very nice but complex slide. What it says is, this constellation here is a collection of all side effects that have been collecting through vapors, through the web, okay? there are a lot of things. I'm not going to read them all to you. Of course, this is a sign that for some people, there are hypersensitivity reaction occurring. Let's talk about eye drops. You can use eye drops. Anybody can use eye drops, but there are people who are sensitized to some components in the eye drops, and about 2–3% of these people will not be able to tolerate it. And that's exactly the percentage that we see in the survey. It's not here. There are a number of side effects, for example, in asthmatics who vape these ingredients. And to me, as a respiratory physician, this is incredible. Why is it incredible? Because an asthmatic patient can develop asthma by breathing cold air from the Alps. Nothing is more clear than the cold air from the Alps, but it's cold, so it's irritant. The same asthmatics will not develop asthma with vape because it's warm and doesn't trigger asthma attacks. Okay, so, but there are 2–3% of people with respiratory conditions that can develop problems, but just as somebody can develop conjunctivitis from the wrong eye drop. So flavorings, this is a hot theme that would require a long time. I'll try to summarize again using the happy cells on the bottom of the dish, so I don't have to re-explain this to you. And all I'm going to say is there are some ingredients that can cause some cytotoxicity, okay? In this case, coffee. But mind you, coffee will be banned by the TBD anyway because it's psychostimulant, so I'm not going to talk about this. There's been also quite a lot of talk about cinnamon cytotoxicity. I do believe these are very early studies with very early products. I think most of what we see here is that some products are containing contaminants, and it is the contaminants that is causing cytotoxicity. In fact, you know, the level to which this cytotoxicity was occurring was 400 times lower than the levels that are allowed by the Environmental Protection Agency. So there must be a mistake somewhere. The research in this area needs realistic approaches. And I'm not going to delve into this because I really want to keep it nice and short. Another area of great interest is the acetyl and acetylpropanil. You know, these are the components that give the buttery aroma to many e-liquids, okay? Why we started having problem with diacetyl and acetylpropanil? Because we know from occupational medicine the term of popcorn lungs. To make popcorn, you need a lot of diacetyl, a lot. And we know that from the early studies in the 70s, when the workers in these factories went unprotected, they developed this popcorn lung disease. Okay. There is a lot of diacetyl in the e-liquid for obvious reason. About 74% of the products tested by my dear friend Konstantinos Farsalinos have shown to contain diacetyl, and it seems to be a bit above some safety levels that are being recommended. Okay, so the obvious recommendation would be let's limit diacetyl, but I really want to stimulate your thinking by saying, let's look at the tobacco cigarette. Tobacco cigarette is in the range of 300 to 400 micrograms of this stuff. So if I project diacetyl in your good old home brand of tobacco cigarette, it goes off scale. And in fact, I've never seen popcorn lung disease in a cigarette smoker. I see many cigarette smokers. So you really need, it's not a problem. It's avoidable because there are artificial flowers that can do exactly the same job, and their toxicology is very well known and it's perfect. But to me, it's a risk. It's an avoidable known risk. Contaminants. There's a lot of talk about heavy metals. Most of the heavy metals are coming from the wick and from the coil. It's nickel chromium most of the times. That's the main. But usually the main level of nickel chromium coming from these elements in your electronic cigarettes are not of levels that can endanger you, because they are all within those limits presented by the US Pharmacopoeia. The US Pharmacopoeia sets a limit that is in that red box. I'm not going to read it, but it says for inhalational drugs, so there are metals in the drugs, in the vapors in the drugs, you know, nebulizers, stuff for asthmatics and COPD patients, okay, are very well within those limits, although they are comparable to tobacco cigarettes. So don't worry about that. I'm not going to spend a word on nitrosamines. To me, this is a known problem. There are no nitrosamines unless there's some contamination in some tobacco extracts in some liquids. This should be, of course, we are working towards standards of quality and safety with a lot of companies, association, VAPE, ESITA, IDUS, AFNOR, BSI. We're trying to make some good work so that the regulators in Europe cannot say anything about our quality levels. And the consumer is protected. So another big area of debate is thermal degradation, and particularly aldehydes. Aldehydes are formaldehyde, acetaldehyde. Let's focus on the first two. And if you compare with the conventional cigarette, one conventional cigarette equates to 15 puffs of your electronic cigarette, you know the difference is formaldehyde is 10 times less in electronic cigarettes, and acetaldehyde is 450 times less than your own old tobacco cigarette. But this is not all. This is when I use this guy, Dr. Count's criteria. If I use better studies from California institutes, the ranges are completely different. And you know what happens? The same slides becomes not 10 times less than tobacco cigarette, it's 57 times less than tobacco cigarette for formaldehyde. And from acetaldehyde is 2,200 times less, to 22,000% less, okay? What the regulators want more? You tell me, for God's sake. Of course, and that's for you guys that you play a lot with your little toys. There's a component that needs to be controlled, and that's its temperature. And as you can see here, temperature has having a big factor in production of aldehydes. Aldehydes can be a little bit carcinogenic and are irritant as well. But let me tell you something. Developing a lung cancer takes more than one single cancerogenic substances. It needs a cocktail. And if you think that tobacco smoke contains more than 10,000 different chemicals and more than 40 recognized carcinogens, you know why you may develop lung cancer. Not all smokers develop lung cancer. So we have an inbuilt defense system that protects us. But more carcinogenic substances, the more the risk. If you have one, impossible. Okay, so you see temperature is having an effect. But again, this is nothing compared to tobacco cigarettes, once again. This does not mean let's have big vape, let's put more wattage in our wicks and coils. You need to be also responsible. We need to inform you how to use properly your device. So it's your lifestyle decision whether you want to be healthy or even healthier. Okay? So it's all about lifestyle choices. You can decide to quit smoking or to quit vaping and to go to live in the Alps and to run in the green fields like this young lady. And that's your healthy choice. Can you afford that, guys? Do you want to live in the Alps, in the middle of the Alps forever? No, you're stuck in Paris. Okay? And believe it or not, what you breathe in Paris is going to be something in between your vaping and your good old own cigarette. Last slide. I'm just giving you just a little sample of what we are doing right now to make sure your health stay healthy. First thing that we need to do as a responsible industry, not me, I don't do any industry, but I'm assisting the industry of developing standards, is to work on good manufacturing practices. Quality management system. That means that this liquid you're buying, you really need to know they are coming out of a controlled process in an industry. Like the ice cream you buy, the sweets you buy, they undergo a process of quality. Liquids needs to undergo a process of quality. It doesn't need to be super quality. It needs to be just enough to make sure that your health is protected. So, pharma grade for nicotine and for any solvents. Why pharma grade? Because so I don't have those contaminants. Okay? To me, the problem of contaminants is more a problem of discussion with regulators. They say, oh, but there are a little bit of nitrosamines here. So let's try to avoid all this discussion by working on pharma grades. I'm not saying natural flowers are bad, but from a toxicological assessment point of view, are dodgy and complex and expensive. Because many artificial flowering can just provide you with the same appeal, why don't you use them? They have full toxicological risk assessment done, so why not use it? That would be the best way out. Food colorings, there's a lot of debate about food colorings. In my opinion, they do not add very much to the experience, so I wouldn't use it. But many producers would object to that. Another area which relates specifically to what I've just said about formaldehyde and acetaldehydes is temperature control. But new technology is coming. The new technology will allow the electronic cigarette of the future, but the future is tomorrow, really tomorrow. Basically, we do already have temperature control that really works, so they will not speed your car about 130 miles per hour. You'll have a BMW with speed control at 80, sorry. But if you want to be safe, that's what you should do. And of course, there's also the big chapter about safer materials like wicks and coils and plastics. You know, they can all have an influence on your health, but I think together with temperature control, we are going to minimize this aspect. And all of this just because consumer safety must be a priority. It's not just about health, it's consumer safety. It's a basic principle. And this industry is very, very young, so it needs some standard of quality and safety. And by the way, this hand is mine. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, professeur Polosa, pour cette présentation.
Thank you for this presentation, Professor.
Oui, il faut les écouteurs, et cela me permet
So
aussi
thank you for this presentation.
demain,
And tomorrow we will have a conference on the standardization, normalization of the vape products and the actions that are done in France, and of course our European partners as well, CETA for example. And we will be able to see then what the different challenges are that we are facing with to get to certain norms and standards and to guarantee the health and safety of our consumers. There's a microphone going around in the audience, so if you want, you can ask some questions to Mr. Polosa and Mr. Bonnet. Maybe specific questions, general questions, personal questions even, as maybe ex-smokers or vapers. Who would like to ask a question?
Madame, devant.
Merci.
Thank you.
C'est une question personnelle.
A personal question.
Voilà, je suis une ancienne,
I'm
très récente ancienne fumeuse.
An ex-smoker, just recently stopped smoking,
Ça fait 2 ans que je vape.
and I've been vaping for 2 years now.
J'ai été, je ressens, je fais partie, je pense, des 2
And I think I'm within these 2 or 3% of people who have irritations
et j'aurais aimé savoir si c'est
at the lungs when I vape. And do you think it's the vegetal glycerine or the propylglycol? Do you have any idea what the most irritating substance is or what the characteristics of these substances are?
I'll speak slowly, okay? There can be, as you've noticed, many different substances that can have irritant effect. Nicotine itself is an irritant. The throat heat is given partly by nicotine. PG, as you know, is an irritant. So you can switch PG into a complete VG product. Have you tried that? That's a possibility. What kind of electronic cigarette do you use? Is a variable voltage? Is nearly a big battery? So make sure that you're not going over the top. Feel your senses. I mean, Phil Basurdo just said it. You know, you can actually do a lot to improve the irritant effects just by feeling yourself. If you start feeling that there's a burning sensation, and if the aroma is not just right, that means that you are overburning your e-liquid, and this will likely to cause generation of many different substances that may generate irritation. Probably the most irritant substance that irritates you, we don't know. The unknown unknowns of the e-vapor chapter. You have to find it for yourself. Otherwise, just quit even vaping and try to go to the Alps.
C'est la personnalisation de la vape qu'il vous faut, madame.
So personalization of vaping, I think. There's a question on internet. Nicolas Bonnet, maybe you can answer this one.
De la porte d'entrée dans le tabagisme.
What about
parents aussi s'interrogent
parents?
sur le fait de savoir si
They want to
commencer
know
à vaper, ça peut être pour des jeunes la possibilité
what
de devenir
happens
fumeur.
if their children become vapers tomorrow. There's a study from OFT, and this study says, okay, people that start with the electronic cigarette are later on going to be regular smokers as well. What is the relation between e-cigarette and the tobacco? Indeed, this is absolutely a fear that parents see their children taking a regular cigarette after taking the electronic cigarette. But what we see is that the younger people use the electronic cigarette to experiment, and that afterwards they could start smoking the regular cigarette. So some youngsters from 15 to 20 years, the number of these children that smoke is going down. And what happens with these youngsters that start experiment? Are they going to go for the cigarette? Are they going to go for tobacco products? Nothing is less sure. And I'm also involved in research in Paris concerning this, and indeed the youngsters are experimenting, but they're not necessarily going to pass on from electronic cigarette to regular cigarette. And
Monsieur Polosa, je ne connais pas exactement le taux
I'm
de
not sure
des jeunes Italiens.
how many youngsters smoke in Italy, people from 20 years old. What is your analysis of the link between youngsters and vaping in Italy?
We don't have data in Italy to comment on that, but my impression by analyzing the situation in the schools is that the problem of vaping and smoking has to be contextualized in a larger phenomenon, which is cannabis, which is little tablets, MCDC, and other heavier drugs. This is a big phenomenon in the Italian schools, which is bigger than smoking and bigger than cigarette vaping. I'm disconcerted because the public health officials are focusing so much on electronic cigarettes when they should focus on other problems. And the reason why in the US you have a reduction of the overall smoking prevalence may be because electronic cigarette is having success, but my suspicion is that because other drugs are of more interest to youngsters, that they want to have the, wow, we've been young. Oh, you're young, of course. But, young people don't want super safe things. They want to take some risk. And, it's a risk-seeking behavior. And you're not risk-seeking behavior with an electronic cigarette. I cannot believe this. So they can say whatever they want. In a few years, we'll be able to demonstrate once and for all that this getaway story is... Can I just use a bad word in English here?
No.
Okay. Bollocks.
We're in Paris. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions dans le public?
Are there any questions?
It's not recognizing that the real problems are somewhere else.
Bonsoir. A priori, la seule substance
only addictive substance in a cigarette would be nicotine. But if you have the classical cigarette, is it the only substance which is addictive or not? Well, it depends. There's different types of addiction. Addiction not only because of the substance, but also the habit of smoking, of course. Indeed, addiction is also a way of habit, the way you smoke, and there's all kinds of different types of things that can lead to addiction. Could be an interaction between the product, the person, and so to become addictive, you have to be in a certain context, and of course you told us that the scientific studies showed, and they have been there for a few years now, show that nicotine is not the cause of the addiction, but other substances that are in big quantities in these cigarettes. And of course there's been a recent study also which was financed by the tobacco industry, and we can see that the product that everybody knows, and which partially causes addiction is nicotine, but there's a lot of other substances as well. Very specific, there's very specific elements for each and every one of us. It depends on the person. So the fact that people like to smoke, it's a habit. And so another question concerning nicotine. Is it only nicotine in the cigarette that creates addiction? Jacques Louet, a specialist in nicotine and smoking habits. An addiction, it's more complex than this. You have monoamidylsulfidase and other substances that form part of the vapes that come out of cigarettes. And this causes an extra effect next to the nicotine effect. It's a very complex system. So nicotine is indeed the most important substance that causes addiction, but there's also other substances that add an effect to this. And the speed in which the nicotine arrives in the brain is very important as well. So Riccardo has shown us the details. The e-cigarette is not strong enough to produce the same effect as a cigarette. So you have two things. First of all, the speed that goes to the brain, and as well the fact that it's not pure nicotine, but it's a mixture of nicotine and other substances. So that's what makes the difference, and what also causes a different addiction level with different people.
Addiction is a matter of, it's a semantic problem. I think I can be addicted to ice creams if I start eating ice creams like crazy. The point is how much of this eating like crazy is causing disruption in my daily life or in my social interaction. That's the real problem. When we talk of addiction, it's something in our mind, it's a stigma. You know, we talk of addiction and we think of heavy drugs and nicotine. We need to forget to think about this. Addiction is something that can be socially acceptable, like caffeine drinking.
Bonjour et merci pour
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for your explanation. I have a question. I have some friends who are still smoking, and it's difficult to convince them because of all the different information which is going on the net. Is it possible to consult your information, the presentation you gave this afternoon, all the information that you divulged? Would it be possible to give my friends this information, and is it possible to find your information in the internet? That's a very good question. This afternoon we talked about the fact that the e-cigarette is absolutely not as dangerous as the regular cigarette, and we see indeed that some people can think that it's even more dangerous than tobacco. Some people do believe that. So I think you have a number of, for example, for reduce, there's a lot of ideas that circle around and that stick around, but a lot of smokers are afraid to pass on to vaping because they think that it's more dangerous than regular tobacco.
Excellent question, because it allows us to bring on the table a very important debate, which is media is confounding our mind, and media is controlled by the strong powers, pharma, governments, big societies who live on the money of pharma and so forth. So the confusion is not just for your friends, I'm afraid. It's also for a lot of doctors. There are a lot of surveys in the UK showing that the GPs, they don't really know what to say now. They knew 2 years ago. Now they are confused by the media. So this is a big responsibility by the governments, by the media, because this confusion may cost lives. So I'm sure Jacques Lozec has got a great blog, and he will help you, all your friends. I'm sure you connect with IDUS and VAPE, and it'll be a great resource for your friends for serious information. Serious information.
Je disais ça aussi par rapport à... Enfin, vu que moi je suis un vapeur...
So I'm a vapor.
J'y crois à fond.
And I believe in vaping.
Adhérer à l'EIDUS pour un fumeur,
for a smoker to be able to have access to these documents via the association, it is a lot, 10 euros.
Je ne me ferai pas le porte-parole de...
I'm not going to be the speaker for EDUS, but you don't have to become a member to get the information of EDUS. Yes, but that's what they told me. I can't have access to the information if I don't pay a membership of 10 euros. I think that our president is somewhere around. We should ask him. But also very prosaically, you have a feeling, and a lot of ex-smokers can try to explain why it is better to become a vapor instead of a smoker. And also, the people that started vaping are indeed don't like to stand next to an ex-smoker, to a smoker, because they don't like the smoke of cigarettes anymore. Just to add something, the electronic cigarette, as I presented it, is a product which will improve health for the ex-smokers, of course. And the EDUS website, there you can find indeed information on studies, and they have recommendations, which is good, which is justified, and we as scientific people, of course we can criticize it sometimes because it's the way some things are formulated, but I think basically this is good information. And the best information always came from the consumers as well. Before, it was the government that divulged, that spread information. So, about the confusion within the media, the vapors could have been destabilized by the report of the World Health Organization. We're going to talk about this, but maybe it's the role of the WHO to have a regulatory framework. Do you think that the battle has already been lost? And how is this going to be regulatory-wise, or are they going to want to put everything into a regulatory framework or not? What is their role within this? There was a lot of criticism, of course, as you know, but how do you see the future for this matter?
Okay, my understanding is that WHO wants to consider electronic cigarette as tobacco cigarettes. That's the idea. That's their evil plan. I think it's an evil plan because it doesn't make sense. No tobacco, no combustion. Why should we consider like tobacco cigarette? The disadvantage of having electronic cigarette being equated to tobacco cigarette is then that all restriction that applies to tobacco will apply to electronic cigarette as well, regardless. Okay? I don't think this plan is going to work. And I'm not going to tell you why, because there may be evil people that will tell the plan somewhere else. Anyway, I think we will guard the electronic cigarette future, and I think the WHO made a fool of itself, and many scientists are already recognizing how mean is this campaign, and they are engrossing the crusade of the e-cigarette, of the scientists pro-electronic cigarette. So in my view, things are changing for the better. Even in Italy, 2 days ago, I was at the parliament to discuss the new law, because the Italians were the best. They equated electronic cigarette to tobacco last year. You know what happened? Nothing happened, because they were hoping to get a lot of money by the excise taxes. They got nothing. The industry crippled. And now they're rethinking everything back again, and they want to do it properly with scientists on board. So we are guiding the process. So the taxation will be very much reduced, and it will be sustainable, because that's what it has got in their mind. You know, the parliamentarians recognize that this reduced risk and the taxation needs to be reduced at the same level.
Merci. Nous allons terminer cette conférence sur cette note d'espoir.
So this is good hope for Italy, and we hope that things will go for the better in Italy. And what about the World Health Organization? Well, the same thing. Thank you for having assisted, having come to us and talking about these different subjects. Nicolas, thanks to you too. Thanks for following up the conferences and for assisting on the e-cigarette. And the next conference will be at 5 o'clock. Vape culture. There will be Jan Koenen, Philip Bazot, and a third speaker. So we'll start at 5 o'clock this afternoon. And we will see each other tomorrow morning as well for a new conference and to see the review or some information on different countries.